Jewish mysticism and Kabbalah are inextricably linked. Kabbalah is the dominant esoteric movement in Jewish mysticism, having completely taken over since the 17th century. Kabbalah is an oral tradition. In fact, the Hebrew word for tradition is used in its name. It is essential to have guidance from a leader or guide when entering into Kabbalistic teachings and practices to avoid any potential personal dangers involved in mystical experiences. Kabbalah is a mystical teaching in every aspect and contains the unwritten secret knowledge of the Torah, the divine revelation that God transmitted to Moses. While the fundamental tenet of Judaism is the adherence to Mosaic law, Kabbalah is believed to offer humanity a direct connection to the divine. Kabbalah has undoubtedly added a religious dimension to Judaism. Its mystical approaches are considered by many to be dangerously pantheistic or heretical. Origins. The origins of Kabbalah are firmly rooted in the Merkava, or Merkaba mysticism, that flourished in Palestine in the 1st century AD. In Merkava mysticism, the main pursuit was to contemplate the divine throne, or chariot, Merkava, envisioned by the prophet Ezekiel in the Old Testament. This was done in order to become ecstatic in ecstasy. The main goal of Merkava mysticism was to envision the throne of God and the heavenly order. This shifted from Palestine to Babylonia between the 7th and 12th centuries and was heavily influenced by Gnostic beliefs. The ascension of the soul in ecstasy is described in the mystical Merkava writings as a perilous journey to overcome the 7 spheres, or 7 heavens, filled with hostile angels. The soul's goal is to reach the divine throne above the Merkava. Merkava practitioners, called Tsenuim, were a select few who possessed special moral qualities and were required to prepare themselves for mystical experiences through constant fasting. The use of certain incantations and formulas, called seals, was absolutely essential for a successful visionary journey by these elites. These incantations were essential for appeasing the angels who guarded the gates of each celestial plane. An incorrect use of a seal will result in serious injury or even death. The Talmud states that of the 4 men who practiced Merkava, one died, another went mad, another apostatized, and only Rabbi Akiba ben Joseph had a true visionary experience. Merkava practitioners were known as the travelers of the supernatural world. The 2 oldest written sources of this mystical movement are the lesser texts, which are believed to be by Rabbi Akiba, and the greater texts, which are believed to be by Rabbi Ishmael ben Elisha. The Book of Enoch and the Shiur Koma, Divine Dimensions, are also part of the Merkava tradition, containing highly exaggerated anthropomorphic descriptions of God. Sefer Yetzirah. The Sefer Yetzirah, Book of Creation, is the 2nd step in the Kabbalah tradition, which appeared between the 3rd and 6th centuries. The Sefer Yetzirah is the oldest known Hebrew work on magic and cosmology. It definitively states that the universe was created from 22 letters of the Hebrew alphabet and 10 divine syllables called Sephirot. The letters and syllables form the 32 paths of secret wisdom that God used to create the universe. The Sefer Yetzirah has also been wrongly attributed to Abraham. It is therefore sometimes referred to as Otiyot de Avraham Avinu, the alphabet of our father Abraham. Yetzirah introduced the concept of Sephirot, which had a profound influence on Judaism in later periods. The plural word Sephirot means numbers in Hebrew. The singular form of the word is Sephirah, or Sephira, cipher. The Yetzirah clearly states that the Sephirot can be interpreted as 10 separate entities or forces through which God the Creator manifests himself. The argument is clear. The 10 stages of the infinite unknowable God, called the Most High, reflect the different creative qualities of God. Kabbalah states that the connection between each Sephirah and another Sephirah forms the rhythm of creation. The most frequently debated topic in Kabbalah is the mystical nature and precise function of the Sephirot. Despite harsh criticism, the Sephirot constitute the fundamental principle of Kabbalistic mysticism. The Sephirot are listed as follows: Keter Elyon, the supreme crown; Halma, wisdom; Bina, intelligence; Hesed, love; Gevura, might; Tiferet, beauty; Netzah, eternity; Hod, glory; Yesod, foundation; and Malkut, kingdom. The Sephirot are also known by other names, including steps, principles, qualities, and crowns. The first 4 groups of 10 Sephirot symbolize the universal elements: divine spirit, air, water, and fire, while the remaining 6 groups symbolize the directions: right, left, front, back, up, and down. The Sephirot correspond to the various parts of the human body, as do the letters of the alphabet. This makes man a microcosm of creation. Sefer HaBahir. The Sefer HaBahir, Book of Brightness, is another crucial text in Kabbalah. It emerged in the 12th century. It has had a profound and lasting impact on esoteric Jewish mysticism and Judaism in general. Bahir did not just interpret the Sephirot as instruments of creation and the continuity of the universe, it also introduced concepts such as Gilgul, the transmigration of souls, strengthening the foundations of Kabbalah with an intense contribution of mystical symbolism. The Bahir is, in fact, a comprehensive symbolic interpretation of the Old Testament. It is based on the mysterious meaning of the sounds and shapes of the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. The book is believed to have first appeared in the Provence region of France in the second half of the 17th century. However, Kabbalists are certain that the Bahir is much older, with its first applications dating back to Rabbi Nehunya ben Hakana in the 1st century AD. They also assert that some of the statements in the book were handed down from 3rd century Jewish scholars called Tanaim. An objective evaluation of medieval manuscripts has irrefutably demonstrated that the author of the Bahir incorporated some mystical concepts and texts that had already arrived in Europe from the East. The Bahir, written in a mixture of Hebrew and Aramaic, succeeded in introducing intense mystical symbolism into Kabbalah and, through Kabbalah, into Judaism, despite its highly irregular and often puzzling structure. The contemporary Jewish scholar, Gershom Gerhard Scholem, was unequivocal in his view that this mystical symbolism was the most important influence of Kabbalah on Jewish religious thought. The Bahir provides the earliest known explanation of the 10 divine formations that mysteriously symbolize the creation and survival of the universe. These 10 discourses, Ma'amarot, divided into 3 upper and 7 lower signs, are the famous Sephirot of Kabbalah. The Bahir also introduced the concept of soul migration, Gilgul, and the idea of the cosmic tree, symbolizing the divine power of creation, to Kabbalistic theories. The Bahir states that the concept of evil is a fundamental principle inherent in God himself. The concluding section of the work is drawn from an ancient mystical text, the Great Mystery, Raza Rabbah. Kabbalists accept the Bahir as divine commandments, despite opposition from many Jewish clerics. Sefer HaTemunah. The Sefer HaTemunah, Book of Images, which first appeared in Spain in the 13th century, is a Hebrew work of unknown authorship. Temunah states that the letters of the Hebrew alphabet possess mystical meanings, and that there are sections of the Torah that are invisible to the human eye. Temunah's most important contribution is the addition of the concept of cosmic cycles, Shemitot, to Kabbalah. Each cosmic era therefore brings a different interpretation of the Torah in accordance with its corresponding divine attributes. The Temunah is centered on the first 3 Shemitot, which are governed by God's attributes of favor, judgment, and mercy. This means that each of these 3 eras has its own Torah. Humanity, still living in the era of judgment, perceives the Torah as a set of commandments and prohibitions. Tamuna's relative interpretation of the Torah strongly influenced the idea of Sabbateanism, a messianic movement that emerged on Ottoman lands in the 17th century. The fundamental premise of Sabbateism is that the Torah will only achieve its true purpose through its apparent abrogation. This theory, which originated in Tamuna, is clear. Judaism is not a religion with definite rules. It is a faith with different rules in each different era. Sefer HaZohar. The famous Sefer HaZohar, Book of Splendor, which some Kabbalists ascribe a sacredness to rival the Torah, originated in Spain. The Zohar confidently describes the mystery of creation and the functions of the Sephirot, developing profound mystical concepts of the soul, evil, and creation. Written in the 18th century and mostly in Aramaic, it is the definitive text of esoteric Jewish mysticism, or Kabbalah. The Zohar brought a new vitality and momentum to traditional mystical approaches in the Jewish religion after the 14th century. This was despite the fact that esoteric mysticism had been practiced in the Jewish religion since the 1st century AD. The Zohar is comprised of 7 distinct chapters. The largest section deals with the inner, mystical, symbolic meanings of the sacred texts in the first 5 books of the Old Testament, Torah, and the books of Ruth and Proverbs. The Zohar juxtaposes long sermons, short discourses, and stories, all centered on Simeon ben Yohai and his disciples. The Zohar names Simeon as the author, but contemporary scholars are convinced that Moses de Leon wrote most of it. Nevertheless, it is possible that the extant text contains quotations from some ancient mystical writings. Kabbalah of Luria. After their expulsion from Spain in 1492, Jewish anticipation of the end of the world and the coming of the Messiah intensified. This led to a dramatic increase in interest in Kabbalah. In such a spiritual environment, the city of Safed in the Galilee, home to Isaac ben Solomon Luria, the greatest Kabbalist of all time, became the undisputed center of Kabbalah in the 16th century. Luria, also known as Arslan Ha-Ari, was born in Jerusalem in the Ottoman territories in 1534. The main source for his life is a biography entitled The Life of Ari, Toledot Ha-Ari. The author is unknown. This work, written and published some 20 years after Luria's death, is a haphazard combination of real and imagined elements about Luria. Toledot states that Luria's father died young, and his mother immigrated to Egypt with her young son to join her wealthy family. Luria received a religious education and studied Jewish law, halakha, from the outset. He wrote commentaries on the famous jurist Isaac ben Jacob al-Fasi's Sefer HaHalachot while still very young. Luria was also involved in commerce during his youth. Luria soon focused his full attention on Jewish mysticism. During this period, he withdrew from everything and lived alone for 7 years in his uncle's house on an island on the Nile. After studying the early Kabbalists, he focused his research on the Zohar and read the works of Cordovero, the most famous Kabbalist of his time. Luria's first work was his definitive commentary on the Book of Secrecy, Sifra di Tseni Uta, a section of the Zohar. This commentary is entirely influenced by classical Kabbalah and bears no trace of his original teaching, which would later be known as the Kabbalah of Luria. In 1570, Luria made the bold decision to emigrate to Safed, the epicenter of the Kabbalistic movement, to study under the renowned Cordovero. During his studies, he began teaching Kabbalah in a new system and gathered many students around him. The most talented of these students was Hayim Vital, who would go on to transcribe Luria's teachings. Luria's teachings on Kabbalah were exclusively for an esoteric circle. He did not allow the general public to participate in his research or lectures. He dedicated most of his time to educating his students, but also made a living from his trade, which was very active in Saft at the time. From the outset, The Kabbalists gathered around Cordovero in Saft had established a distinct way of life, characterized by the performance of specific rituals. For example, on Shabbat, Saturday, they would go out into the countryside to celebrate the day they personified as the Queen of the Sabbath. Luria introduced new practices to these wanderings, including Kavanot, meditation, and Yehudim, unification. These rituals were acts of purification, a kind of spiritual cleansing from the unclean shell, kelapot, the body in which souls were condemned to live until the coming of the Messiah. Luria's personality had a profound impact on Safed, infusing the city with an intense spiritual atmosphere, a messianic tension, and a fire of creativity. Sincere devotion to religion and total renunciation of the world were the defining characteristics of Kabbalistic life. The Zohar was interpreted as saying that the Messiah would appear in Galilee in 1575. Luria succeeded in establishing a versatile and fruitful Kabbalistic system in Saft in the short time he lived there, 2 years until his death. This added new elements to Jewish mysticism. He never wrote his own teaching apart from a very short text containing a commentary on the first chapter of the Zohar. Luria died of an epidemic in August 1572. Hasidism is the correct answer. Historians of religion are convinced that Sabbatism would have marked the end of the Jewish religion had it not been thwarted. The Sabbatai Sevi movement fulfilled the theosophical aspirations of some progressive clergymen and met the needs of the Jewish masses. The masses were not satisfied with the dry interpretations of the Talmudists and were tired of the socio-economic pressure of the ruling classes. The movement also fulfilled the theosophical aspirations of some progressive clergymen. A similar situation prevailed in the Kingdom of Poland, which included the territories of Lithuania, Belarus, and Ukraine. The Hasidism movement, which emerged in the 18th century and took the Lurianic Kabbalah as the basis of its intellectual theories, was active in Poland. Hasidism is a mass movement based on small groups of knowledgeable members with the lowest possible level of organization and intensive use of propaganda and preaching methods. The founder of Hasidism was Israel ben Eliezer, known as the Master of the Good Name, Baal Shem Tov, one who knows the unspeakable name of God. Eliezer was born around 1700 and died in 1760 in southern Poland. Despite lacking the traditional education of his time, he was an impressive figure with remarkable spiritual gifts, able to draw not only the common people, but also the intelligentsia. The abundance of legends about him has undoubtedly prevented detailed knowledge of his personal teaching, which he never systematized. Eliezer adopted the method of interpreting sacred texts, using stories from everyday life and folklore inspired by the methods of itinerant preachers whose activity in Eastern European Judaism intensified in the 18th century. This method became a constant feature of Hasidism. However, it would be wrong to assume that all the authentic theories and teachings of the movement are reflected in such stories and anecdotes. The basic doctrinal work is expressed in the weekly sermons and rituals on the Torah given by Hasidic rabbis. Every rabbi has made their own unique additions and interpretations to Hasidic teaching. The teaching of Hasidism was therefore greatly diversified and differentiated during the first 3 generations of the movement. Hasidism has its roots in Lurianic Kabbalah. However, Hasidism is unique in its concept of being with God. Devekut. Devekut is the goal and constant duty of all Jews. Human existence must be based entirely on spiritual values in all circumstances. This necessity demands a complete re-evaluation of the intellectual concepts of Kabbalah. The inner life of the believer must be given all the weight. The cosmic drama has moved on from the universe of Sephirot to the inner life of the human being. Furthermore, Hasidism transforms into a social reality, another requirement that was part of the Lurianic doctrine of restoration, tikkun. It places at the center of the religious life and organization of the group an unquestionable authority, a leader with supernatural powers. the tzaddik. Hasidism has unquestionably produced a spiritual renewal in every region where it has been successful. The other side of the coin reveals the existence of inter-rabbi rivalries that gradually took the form of personal cults. This led to the isolation of Hasidic communities from the surrounding society, the poor socio-economic conditions this created, and the hostility towards the Jews who isolated them. From its earliest days, Hasidism met with great resistance from the official Talmudic Jewish authorities, who were hypersensitive to the influence of Sabbatayism. The strict adherence to ritualistic rules by Hasidic adherents was unacceptable to the opponents, mitnagadim, for several reasons. Hasidim unconditionally submit to their tzaddik, eschew synagogues and meetings with other Jews, transform religious ceremonies, pray in everyday clothes, and favor mystical meditation over the study of the Talmud. Nevertheless, this rivalry between Hasidism and Talmudism did not result in a schism. After 3 generations of contention, a spontaneous and unspoken compromise was reached. However, both sides were fully aware that their differences remained unresolved. This compromise was beneficial to Hasidism as a whole, but it did require Hasidism to make some concessions in the area of education. Hasidic groups were able to survive the devastation of World War II on Eastern European Jewry, thanks to their internal organization. After the war, all the most important centers of Hasidism had to move to America. Hasidism chose America over Palestine, driven by economic considerations and a clear opposition to Zionism and the State of Israel. The most famous and influential Hasidic group in America is the Lubavitchers. Based in New York City, they are named after the well-known Lyubavitchy school of Hasidism in Russia. Conclusion: Kabbalah plays an undeniable role in the spiritual life and thought of contemporary Judaism, despite its diminished significance compared to the past. I can say with confidence that there is no truly living Kabbalistic movement today. Nevertheless, the personal efforts of writers such as Abraham Isaac Kook are still influential. Martin Buber also deserves a mention. He exerted a strong influence on westernized Jews in the period between the 2 world wars, and his work on the reform of religious thought included the propagation of Hasidism. Abraham Joshua Heschel, a Polish Jew, was undoubtedly an important and influential figure. Jewish mysticism indisputably influenced the intellectual life of non-Jewish nations. Kabbalah, which had been diverted from its original purposes, indisputably transcended the borders of Judaism and led to the emergence of some currents of thought in the Christian community starting from the Renaissance period. The Christian Kabbalah was born in the 15th century as a result of Jews converting to Christianity in Spain and Italy. They claim to have found the truths of the Christian faith in Kabbalistic documents. Consequently, numerous Christian humanist thinkers sought to engage with Jewish mysticism, and some succeeded in acquiring a comprehensive understanding of Kabbalah. The most prominent of these were Giovanni Pico della Mirandola, Egidio da Viterbo, Johannes Reuchlin, and Guillaume de Postel. Reuchlin's De Arte Kabbalistica was the first Kabbalistic explanation of the Kabbalah, written in a language understandable to non-Jews. The occult thought of the 16th century, the natural philosophy of the 17th and 18th centuries, some of the motifs that colored the ideology of Freemasonry, and the occult and theosophical theories that have resurfaced today all focused on the Kabbalah and borrowed from it, even if they could not capture its true meaning and spirit.